Brexit is a school of patience, and it still is. Merci.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in and for your patience. Very happy to see you again, albeit via these screens in between us. I hope you're all doing well, and your families and your teams in circumstances which remain very serious and which, of course, justify mobilising all our institutions as a priority, particularly the case with the European Commission under the authority of our President Ursula von der Leyen. 3 weeks ago, following our second round of negotiations to build a future partnership with the United Kingdom, I told you that our objective on the European Union side was to make progress in parallel on all the negotiating subjects, including on the most difficult subjects. This week, therefore, we have continued to work together with David Frost, and I'd like to thank him, with the two teams, very professional teams. I'd like to thank them too. Altogether, it's about 250 negotiators on the British side and 250 negotiators and experts also on the EU side in the Commission. Discussions have been able to be based on new text proposed and sent to us by the United Kingdom, which now cover most of the subjects that our own draft treaty covers, as published, as you know, on the 18th of March. So we're still waiting for the United Kingdom to wish to share publicly its own text. My understanding is they're going to do that in the near future. We'll be able to work in even greater transparency and effectiveness on text which we can then communicate to the Parliament and Member States. This week's discussions have enabled us to clarify a number of useful points on various subjects such as trade in goods, transport, participation of the United Kingdom in the future Union programmes. Also, we've been able to start an initial constructive dialogue on the difficult file, which is fisheries, even if, as I speak to you now, our positions are very divergent, extremely so. So apart from these few modest openings, no progress has been possible on the other more difficult subjects. The United Kingdom has not got into a real discussion about the level playing field, whatever they say. It's the rules of fair play for the economy and trade, the level playing field, which we agreed on with Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, in the political declaration, which remains a relevant document for today and the future. On this subject, it was a round of diverging views without any progress. On governance of our future relations, the few useful discussions we have had bore only on sectors and sectoral issues. We've not been able to get into or make a progress towards the single framework for governance that we would like to have to build with our major neighbour a full, complete partnership guaranteeing effectiveness and implementation of transparency. I wish to be clear and transparent with you. We were also disappointed by the lack of ambition on the UK side in other areas too, which are not at the centre of negotiations, but which are important and symbolic. For example, fighting money laundering. And also a lack of ambition on the respective roles of the European Parliament, the British Parliament, civil society, when it comes to implementing our future relations. Now, I don't understand why the United Kingdom refuses to include in our agreement mechanisms for consultation of our parliaments, both British and European, and civil society. It is nonetheless what we have in modern association agreements with the European Union to ensure the greatest democratic legitimacy and to enable parliaments and NGOs, social partners, to give their views. This is a particularly important point for us, and the European Union's own Economic and Social Committee is particularly keen on that. And finally, on police and judicial cooperation in the criminal area, although we broadly agree on the objectives, we run into a number of fundamental problems, which we'll have to solve if we are going to get going on an operational basis, new instruments for cooperation once the UK has left the European Union. However, the UK refuses to commit to an agreement with us on guarantees for mutual protection of fundamental rights and individuality freedoms which stem from the European Convention on Human Rights. Although that was something which figured in the political declaration by agreement. It's a question of avoiding lowering of existing standards and maintaining proper data protection. And on one of the negotiating tables, it was going so far as to ask the EU to ignore or set aside its own law and ECJ case law on the PNR file, for example, which is quite impossible, clearly. The question of reciprocity when it comes to data exchange between the British authorities and member states is also important. The European Parliament, moreover, recalled the day before yesterday quite clearly at its plenary and by a vote there that any biometric exchange of data, that's the PRUM programme I'm referring to, with the UK should be a reciprocal exchange accompanied by very specific guarantees. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is a lucid stock-taking of what we've done this week. To be quite sincere, this round has been disappointing. Nonetheless, we remain determined to continue to work together to build an ambitious partnership with the United Kingdom in an extremely short period of time available to us. That is, if the UK were to confirm in June its decision not to seek an extension to this negotiation. But extension remains possible for 1 or 2 years by common agreement. In order to build this partnership, I'd like to take this opportunity of this press briefing to cover 3 points in my mandate, which have been reconfirmed recently by the 27 governments of the European Union, and which are strongly supported also by the Parliament and by its President, Mr. Sassoli, and also personally by the other institutional presidents, our own President, Ursula von der Leyen of the European Commission, and Charles Michel, President of the European Council. Firstly, our ambition remains and will remain a free trade agreement without any customs duties, without any quotas for all goods. Zero tariff, zero quota for all goods. That would be a first in our history of trade agreements in the European Union. Now, of course, trade between us cannot be as fluid as it is today within a single market and customs union because the UK wished to leave the single market and the customs union. So everybody has to prepare themselves for changes, which come what may. Even if we manage to get a partnership agreement, economic and trade agreement, which I do wish, there will have to be changes at the end of transition, that is in January 2021. But our proposal shows our level of ambition with a major neighbouring country, which is really and truly interconnected with our own ecosystem because it is today part of it. A former member with whom, from our point of view, it would be really quite artificial to do a cut and paste, a sort of best off of our free trade agreements with, let's say, Canada or Korea or Japan. In this negotiation, Europe is looking to the future, not towards the past and its precedents. The second point, looking towards the future means also realising that trade policy is no longer what it was. Trade policy has moved on. We're no longer in the 70s, a time at which trade agreements sought mainly and sometimes solely to dismantle tariff barriers. But as I say, we've moved on from that period. Under our President and the Trade Commissioner, Mr. Hogan, trade agreements these days have to be at the service of sustainable development. Any new trade agreement has to be at the service of a modern vision given the major climate change before us and the requirements of social standard protection, environmental protection. Indeed, in our cooperation agreements with third countries, we seek to raise these standards in the general interest of citizens and consumers. So any new trade policy has to be based on conditions of fair competition, in particular when it comes to state aid, social standards or taxation. It must also contribute to achieving shared goals. So the agreement between the EU and the UK, as we see it, should be a force for better protecting the environment and for helping us fight together climate change. Moreover, what we're seeing is that the UK has set itself a carbon neutrality objective. They've told us they want to maintain high social and environmental standards. Sometimes they say even higher than the European Union. Well, so much for better. To get into detailed negotiations to make sure we have mutual, reciprocal, tangible guarantees to identify appropriate instruments. All of that, if the UK's intentions are, as I just recalled, that's what we're being told by the UK, then that shouldn't be too difficult. And yet, the UK is refusing to get into this discussion. I even heard Michael Gove suggest recently and publicly that the United Kingdom, in order to avoid the level playing field, could give up on the zero tariff, zero quota objective, which would be tantamount to reinstalling between us tariffs and quotas, which we've not had for decades. Indeed, because we're together in a single market. It would be something quite anachronistic. And the European Union certainly, obviously, doesn't want to see that. Moreover, such an approach, as proposed by Mr. Gove, would require detailed negotiation, very sensitive negotiation on each and every tariff line. And we have got experience in that recently with Japan or with Canada. We know that it takes years to do that. A negotiation of that kind could only be possible with an extension to the transition. If that is what we should understand from Mr. Gove's position, and if what Mr. Gove is saying implies that the UK then is seeking an extension to negotiation. But above all, and let's avoid any misunderstanding here, even if we are to get rid of, let's say, 98, 99% of tariffs and not 100%, as we are proposing, the European Union will, as part of a modern partnership, and I restate this, we will require the same strong guarantees of a level playing field, because that is part of our requirements and commitments to meet the challenges of the future, to protect certain common goods, to protect consumers, because we're not going to bargain away our European values to the benefit of the British economy. Economic and trading fair play is not for sale.
It's not nice to have, it is a must have. La position.
The firm position taken by the EU member states is, let me repeat, that without a clear and effective level playing field framework, without a balanced fisheries agreement, there will not be any possible agreement on our economic and trading partnership. Now, of course, some parts of our future relations will also require fair, specific terms of competition. For example, in road haulage, any road haulage agreement requires us to have an agreement on drivers' working conditions. including driving time and resting time. And also, it would have to have guarantees regards the businesses employing these drivers. Thirdly, we seek a very broad, ambitious partnership which goes far beyond just trade in goods and services. To that end, we now really must find common solutions to all the subjects in parallel, and I do stress in parallel. Ladies and gentlemen, why should we give favourable conditions to certain British professions to work on our markets, whilst our European fishermen would find themselves excluded from British waters, running the risk of losing their jobs? Why should we help British businesses to provide their services in Europe when we would have no guarantee that our businesses would get a fair play treatment in the UK? Quite outside of economic partnership, why would we be ambitious on extradition, exchange of personal data, if we were not to have a clear commitment towards protection of European citizens' fundamental rights were concerned? And finally, how could we guarantee the coherence in our future partnership across all the major subjects without a single institutional framework, so that the UK and the EU thereby can jointly commit and honour all of their commitments? Now, often the UK refers to precedents in the area of trade. Now, as I've said, in the global framework of what is the new model free trade agreement, each of these agreements is different. Within the model we have with Canada, that's not exactly the same agreement we have with South Korea or with Japan, for example. The UK then refers to these precedents, previous trade agreements, does it every time we meet. They say they would be happy to have a Canada-type agreement. But at the same time, and this is a real paradox in negotiation, they ask for far more from us than is available under the Canadian model. They seek to have the same benefits as a member state of a single market, a member state of our trading union, without the obligations. Let me touch on the UK's willingness to maintain for its service providers virtually full freedom of movement for short stays, or to have electricity interconnectors equivalent to what we have in the single market, what they call existing arrangements, to continue to assimilate British auditors to European auditors when it comes to auditing companies, to maintain a system of recognition of professional qualifications as broad and widespread as we have on the single market, and to be able to have their say, that's another British demand, quite beyond what we have in the Canadian model, to have co-decision in the European model regards those decisions which are linked to granting or withdrawing equivalences on financial services. Ladies and gentlemen, we are negotiating now with a third country. It's become a third country because it wanted to. It's not a question, and it will never be a question of picking and choosing the more attractive aspects of a single market without respecting the conditions which have to be met by those countries which are in the single market. And that even includes Norway. So I have to tell you, today, there seems to be a real lack of understanding regards the objective, mechanical even, consequences of the British choice to leave the single market and the customs union. And therefore, to make progress in these negotiations, if it is the UK's intention to get an agreement with the European Union, then the UK will have to become more realistic. It will have to move beyond its lack of understanding. Will doubtless have to change its strategy.
Of both worlds. Ladies and gentlemen, in parallel to these negotiations, both the UK and the EU have a legal commitment to implement the withdrawal agreement. Here, citizens' rights are a priority for both sides and since the very beginning. The UK tells us it has some concerns about the treatment of British nationals in the EU. We have yesterday received a letter from Michael Gove. I want to tell you that the Commission is very, very attentive to this issue, and we have just published guidelines to support all 27 member states to live up to their commitments of the withdrawal agreement. But at the same time, we will also be watching closely to make sure that EU citizens residing in the UK do not face unfair treatment or any kind of discrimination. And the European Parliament is particularly attentive to this. Similarly, we have both committed to correctly implement the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland. The UK has not yet laid out its approach for fulfilling its obligation under the protocol. I would like to recall that the solution we agreed with the UK ensures continued peace and stability on the island of Ireland and uphold the Good Friday Belfast Agreement in all its dimensions. That the agreement preserves the EU single market by ensuring all the necessary checks and control from goods entering Northern Ireland from Great Britain or any elsewhere. So all those who pursue these objectives must now also correctly implement the protocol. The system needs to be fully operational on the 1st of January next year. This is a stable and lasting solution, subject to a process of ensuring democratic consent from the majority of the elected representatives of Northern Ireland's Legislative Assembly. I explained all of this very clearly and very transparently during my last visit to Belfast last January. So, together with Maros Sefcovic, our Vice President, who co-chairs the Joint Committee with Michael Gove for the UK, we are awaiting with confidence, but also with vigilance, the approach that will be taken by the UK's authorities. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, the agreement we are negotiating will structure our relationship for years to come, decades then, even. The EU wants a modern, unprecedented, forward-looking agreement, not a narrow one rooted in past precedents and sliced up sector by sector. Our future partnership will be shaped by the choices we make this year together. The EU will not act in haste on such an important matter. Our negotiation mandate was not written in haste. It is a reflection of 3 years of work, starting as early as in April 2017, with the first guidelines adopted by the European Council and the first resolution adopted by the Parliament. The next round must bring new dynamism in order to avoid a stalemate between us. Let us make a success of round 4 in the first week of June by making the tangible progress we need across the board at last. Until the very end, the EU and I will remain calm, firm on our principles and respectful. Thank you very much.